My name is Evelyn Marsh, and I was 28 when I finally bought the beach house I had spent nearly a decade working toward. I had left my corporate job 3 weeks earlier, signed the closing papers that same afternoon, and I had barely carried the first box through the front door when my mother called. She did not congratulate me. Instead, she announced that she and my father had sold their house and would be moving into mine the very next morning. I thought I had misheard her until she laughed. "Your father thinks we should take the upstairs suite," she said. "You can use one of the smaller rooms." I reminded her that I had bought the property with my own savings and that I had never invited anyone to live with me. Her voice hardened instantly. "We're your family, Evelyn. Find somewhere else if it bothers you so much." Then my brother's voice came through in the background. "Tell her the movers will be there before noon." I didn't argue. I stood among the unopened boxes and, strangely, I smiled, because for the first time, their entitlement didn't frighten me. It gave me clarity. "Drive safely," I said, and ended the call. By 6 the next morning, everything was ready. At 11:47 a.m., my phone began buzzing. By noon, I had 34 missed calls. My family had reached the beach house, tried to begin their new life there, and found a welcome they hadn't expected waiting at the front door. Before I explain why my mother called 34 times and what happened when I finally faced her, let me take you back, because the house didn't appear in my life because I was lucky. I started saving for that house at 19 after a summer spent working at a small restaurant near the coast. I would close up after midnight, walk past rows of houses that faced the water, and promise myself that one day I would own a place no one could ever take from me. At the time, I still lived with my parents, took classes at community college, and worked evenings because helping my brother was always treated as the greater priority. His private tuition was called an investment. Mine was something I could manage if I were responsible enough. So I took morning classes, worked nights, finished assignments in my car, and later transferred schools while keeping 2 jobs at once. When my mother once gave me $12,800, I repaid every cent within 26 months. I kept the records because she had a habit of rewriting history whenever it suited her. After graduation, I moved into a leaking studio apartment, took a job in financial operations, accepted every hour of overtime I could get, and deposited every bonus into an account I had labeled simply Ocean. My friends traveled. I stayed home. My coworkers upgraded their cars. I kept mine running on faith and duct tape. A relationship ended because my former partner told me I treated the future like an emergency that constantly needed funding. He wasn't entirely wrong. I had watched my mother use money as a leash for years, and every gift she gave came with an invisible string attached. I wanted one place that belonged to me and no one else. My father, Walter, rarely challenged her. He wasn't cruel, but silence can become its own kind of participation. If she volunteered my time for something, he said she meant well. If she promised my savings to help my brother, he told me to avoid the argument. My brother, Nathaniel, learned the system early. If he framed his wants as family needs, our mother defended him without question. When he wanted money for an apartment, she called it a fresh start. When I needed money for a professional certification, she said adulthood required sacrifice. When his first business failed, she said entrepreneurs deserved second chances. When I worked myself to exhaustion, she simply said I had always been independent. That independence eventually bought the house. It wasn't enormous or glamorous. 3 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, a detached garage, and an upstairs room with windows that looked straight out over the water. I put down 32%, secured a manageable mortgage, and kept enough in savings for repairs. 3 weeks before closing, I resigned from my corporate job after negotiating a remote consulting contract. For the first time, my life finally felt like it belonged to me. My mother knew the closing date. What I didn't know, not until that night, was that she had been quietly planning around my new property for weeks. After our first call, I opened the family group chat and searched my own name. My mother, Diane, had written, "Evelyn's new place will finally give us room to breathe." After the sale of their house closed, she had shared photos from my property listing and referred to the upstairs room as our suite. One aunt asked, gently, whether I was actually comfortable with the arrangement. Diane replied, "She'll complain for a day, then she'll get used to it." Nathaniel added a laughing emoji and wrote, "She owes you after everything you did for her." My father hadn't responded at all. Then I remembered a voice message Nathaniel had accidentally sent me 11 days earlier. At the time, I'd assumed he was talking to a business investor. I played it again. "Mom already wired the 150, he said. "Once they move into Evelyn's place, they won't need much. Dad thinks we're keeping most of the house money in savings, so don't mention the full amount yet." The message cut off abruptly. 30 seconds later, he texted saying it was meant for someone else and asked me to delete it. I told him I had. I hadn't. I stood in my new kitchen and listened to it 3 times. My parents had sold their house. My mother had apparently transferred $150,000 of the proceeds to my brother. My father had no idea of the real amount. And their solution for housing wasn't a modest rental or a smaller home. Their solution was me. Diane had given away their own security because she believed she could simply take mine. That was the moment this stopped being an uncomfortable misunderstanding and became something else entirely. They weren't asking for temporary help after an emergency. They had manufactured the emergency on purpose, then quietly assigned its cost to me, without ever asking. My home wasn't their last resort. It was the foundation of the plan from the beginning. I could have called and confronted them immediately. The old version of me would have explained every sacrifice, offered compromises, and tried to make them understand why I deserved control over something I had bought with my own hands. But explanations had never once changed my mother's behavior, because confusion was never the real problem. She understood my position perfectly. She simply believed she could overpower it. So instead, I opened my laptop and saved everything. The group chat messages, the recording, the deed, the closing documents, and the bank records proving I had repaid the only significant amount my parents had ever given me. Then I called the attorney who had handled my purchase. It was almost 9 at night, and I expected voicemail. She picked up anyway. I explained that relatives intended to arrive the next morning with a moving truck and occupy my house against my wishes. She asked one question: have they ever lived there, paid rent there, received mail there, or signed anything giving them access? "No," I said. "Then put your refusal in writing tonight," she replied. "Do not let their belongings inside, not even temporarily." I sent the same message to my mother, my father, and my brother. I do not consent to anyone moving into my property, storing belongings on my property, entering without permission, or representing themselves as an owner or resident. Any arrival tomorrow will be treated as a day visit only. Movers will not be permitted to unload. My mother responded with a thumbs up emoji. Nathaniel wrote, "Relax. You'll survive." My father said nothing at all. Their silence and their dismissiveness told me everything. They had read the warning, and they intended to ignore it completely. So I stopped preparing an argument and started preparing consequences. At 9:22 that night, I called a 24-hour locksmith and had every exterior lock changed, even though the keys from closing were brand new. My mother had once taken a spare key from my purse and had it copied for emergencies, and I had no intention of underestimating her again. I reset the garage code, changed the security system password, and activated 2 cameras covering the driveway. Then I emailed the moving company named in my mother's group chat message, attaching my deed, my identification, and written notice that I had not authorized any delivery or unloading. The dispatcher called back within 15 minutes, sounding almost relieved rather than annoyed. Apparently, movers walked into family disputes more often than I would have guessed, and the company had no interest in trapping their crew between 2 conflicting sets of instructions. She explained that the truck could still arrive, but nothing would be unloaded without my direct authorization. If the customer refused an alternate destination, the belongings would go into secure storage, with waiting time, transportation, and storage fees charged to the customer. That single call removed the exact weapon my mother had been counting on: momentum. She believed that once the boxes, beds, and furniture were physically inside, guilt would stop me from ever forcing them back out. Preventing the unloading meant I would never have to make that impossible decision in the first place. Next, I contacted the local non-emergency police line. I didn't exaggerate anything. I simply documented that relatives had announced an intention to occupy my home after receiving a written refusal. The dispatcher advised me to avoid any physical confrontation and to call again if anyone attempted forced entry. She gave me an incident reference number, and I printed it out. Then I built the welcome display. I set up a folding table beside the front door and covered it with a plain white cloth. Above it, I taped a sign in large block letters. Welcome to Evelyn's Beach House. Day visitors must check in. No tenancy, residency, storage, or move-in permission has been granted. Below the sign, I placed 3 envelopes.
The first was addressed to Diane.
Inside was a copy of my written refusal, a letter from my attorney confirming sole ownership, a list of nearby hotels and long-term rentals, and an itemized invoice from the moving company showing exactly what the charges would be if the truck went into storage. I also included a simple visitor agreement stating that any entry, if allowed, would end at 6 that evening and would not create any residency rights. At the bottom, I had typed one line: a relationship does not transfer ownership. The second envelope was for my father. It held the deed, my mortgage statement, and a handwritten letter. I told him I loved him and would gladly help him find a reasonable rental, but that I wasn't willing to provide housing while financial facts were being deliberately hidden from him. I included a written transcript of Nathaniel's accidental message, not the recording itself. I wanted my father to have the chance to ask the truth for himself before hearing his own family discuss deceiving him. The third envelope was for Nathaniel. It contained his "she owes you" message, proof that I had repaid the original family loan in full, and a single sentence: the person who received the house money can provide the house. I photographed the display and sent it to my attorney. Then I posted a correction in the family group chat. Several relatives believe I invited Mom and Dad to live with me. I did not. My mother called, then texted, "Take that down before people see it." I replied, "They already saw your claim. Now they can see the correction." Relatives immediately started asking questions. My mother stopped responding. At 10:30 that night, my father called and asked if we could discuss everything in the morning. I told him we could, but that no one would be moving in with belongings. "Your mother believes you're humiliating her," he said. I thought of the message where she told everyone I would complain and then eventually surrender. She had announced a decision about my property publicly without ever asking me. "Correcting it publicly is accuracy," I said, "not humiliation."
He sighed.
"Where exactly do you expect us to sleep? You had a house. You sold it. You received money from the sale. I did not create this situation," I told him. "I will help you find real options. I will not become the option that gets chosen for me without my consent." Then I asked him directly, "Did you know she transferred $150,000 to Nathaniel?" The silence on the line changed instantly. "She told me she loaned him $40,000, he said quietly. Then, after a pause, "I think you should ask to see the account before tomorrow." The call ended soon after. At 11 that night, my mother posted publicly that I was reacting emotionally because leaving my job had made me unstable and that they were only planning to stay briefly while they considered their next purchase. I responded with a screenshot of her calling the upstairs room our suite, then muted the entire chat. There was one last step. She had already invited relatives to arrive at noon the next day with champagne for what she was calling the Marsh family's new beach chapter. She had built herself an audience, expecting my surrender to look like generosity in front of it. Canceling everything now would only let her tell a private, softened version of events afterward. Instead, I scheduled a video call for 12:30 p.m. and invited every adult she had already included. The title was simple: Clarifying the Beach House Arrangement. At midnight, I packed my documents, my laptop, and the original recording into a bag, locked the house, and drove to a small cafe 2 blocks away. From there, I could still watch the cameras and return the moment the movers confirmed nothing had been unloaded. At 6:03 a.m., my mother sent her first message of the day. "We're already on the road. Make coffee." At 10:58, the moving company confirmed the truck was 20 minutes out. At 11:34, my mother's car pulled into the driveway. At 11:36, she saw the sign. At 11:38, the first call came in. By noon, there were 34. I watched the whole arrival through the security feed. My mother stepped out of the car before it had fully stopped, dressed in white trousers and oversized sunglasses, wearing the exact expression she reserved for places where she expected special treatment. My father stayed behind the wheel. Nathaniel arrived less than a minute later, followed by the moving truck and two relatives carrying bottles of champagne. The whole scene had been staged as a celebration. My mother hadn't merely expected me to accept her decision. She had expected me to perform gratitude for it, in front of witnesses. She walked toward the porch, noticed the table, and stopped cold. Nathaniel leaned around her to read the sign. One of the relatives lowered the champagne bottle. My mother tore open her envelope, scanned the first page, looked directly into the camera, and called me. I declined. She called again. I declined again. On the third attempt, she left a voicemail. Evelyn, this is not funny. We have a truck full of furniture. Open the door immediately. The crew leader showed my father the paperwork while my mother tried her copied key on the new lock. It didn't work, of course. I'd been right to expect she still had one. She slammed her palm against the door and called again. Messages followed rapidly. Your key doesn't work. Tell the movers which room is ours. Your father is getting upset. You are embarrassing this family. You cannot keep parents out of a family home. That last message revealed the belief underneath everything else. She never saw the house as my home. To her, it was a family asset, simply because I happened to be the family member who had earned enough to buy it. The movers refused to unload without my direct approval. My mother claimed authority as the owner's mother. The crew leader told her he'd reviewed the deed and needed my confirmation. She called me unstable. He calmly informed her that paid waiting time would begin in 12 minutes. My father opened his envelope. He read the letter, then the transcript. His expression changed. He turned to Nathaniel and asked something I couldn't hear over the feed. Nathaniel looked toward our mother instead of answering. At 11:49, she left another voicemail. If you do not answer, I will have a locksmith open this door. I confirmed once more with the dispatcher that nothing would be unloaded, then called my attorney. She advised me to return with another person present, stay outside, and avoid granting anyone temporary access. The ownership question, she reminded me, was not open for debate. At noon, I walked back with 34 missed calls, 17 messages, and 6 voicemails behind me. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. For years, her anger had made me feel guilty by default. That morning, it simply sounded like a locked door that stayed closed. Everyone saw me before I reached the driveway. My mother marched toward me. What have you done? I prevented an unauthorized move-in. Unauthorized. She pointed at the truck. Those are our belongings. We sold our house. I know. And where do you expect us to go? I included several real options in your envelope. We are not going to a hotel while you sit in a 3-bedroom house. That was your decision, not mine. My father stepped between us, holding the transcript. Evelyn, where did this come from? Nathaniel sent me the recording 11 days ago. My brother's face lost all its color. That was private. It was about using my home to hide the consequences of a financial decision. My mother snapped. This has nothing to do with the house. It has everything to do with it, I said. You transferred money to him because you assumed I would provide free housing afterward. My father turned toward her slowly. Did you give him $150,000? She lowered her voice. This is not the